Hello kids, this is Teacher Geraldine. Today, I will discuss the lessons for this week, so please watch the whole video. The first lesson for this week is about our colonizers. The total number of years other countries controlled the Philippines would be almost 400 years. Our colonizers, Spain, the United States of America, and Japan have certainly left their marks on our life and culture. The Spaniards. The Spaniards first came in 1521. They stayed in our country for more than 300 years. They collected taxes from our ancestors. They occupied the land and distributed many parts of it to the Spanish officials and friars. They introduced Roman Catholic faith to our ancestors. They were successful in most parts of the archipelago. However, many Filipinos in Mindanao had already converted to Islam. The Muslim Filipinos in Mindanao were more successful in defending themselves from colonization. The Muslims of Mindanao, Palawan, and other places also remained faithful to Islam and their own beliefs. Our brothers and sisters from these parts of the country continues to practice Islam. Our indigenous peoples have also kept their religious beliefs and practices. Today, most Filipinos are Christians except for Filipinos in Muslim Mindanao and the indigenous people in the Cordilleras like the Aitas and the Mangyans, and others scattered all throughout the Philippines. Some Filipinos with Chinese ancestry have also remained Buddhists or Taoists. The Spanish colonizers tried to change the Filipinos' way of life, way of thinking, and customs. They had the Filipinos adopt their practices like using Western clothes, holding expensive fiestas which were beyond the means of the Filipinos, having the dead buried in public cemeteries, and having weddings in churches. They controlled the trade between Filipinos and other countries. They also controlled the freedom of expression of the people. They forced Filipino males from ages 16 to 60 to work on the construction of bridges, churches, and other government projects. They were selective in accepting Filipinos to schools because they were afraid that by gaining education, Filipinos would rebel against them. As years went by, more and more abuses and injustice were committed against the Filipinos. This was the sad situation in the Philippines at the time. Filipinos were starting to feel the cruelty of the Spanish colonizers. They wanted reforms. Such was the thinking of Jose Rizal and a group of Filipinos pushing for reforms in the country. Other Filipinos, however, believed that reforms were not enough. They wanted independence or freedom from Spanish control. They included Andres Bonifacio, who founded the Katipunan, a secret organization that led the struggle for Philippine independence from Spain. All over the country, Filipinos joined the revolution. However, our ancestors were not properly organized. Their weapons were also of poor quality compared to those of the Spaniards. Nevertheless, they fought courageously for our freedom. Many Filipino men and women died during this struggle. The 2-year struggle led by the Katipunan was successful as it weakened the Spanish forces. One of the brave men who fought for our independence was a young general from Cavite, General Emilio Aguinaldo. He fought our colonizers to gain freedom. First the Spaniards, then the Americans. His name will always be remembered by Filipinos because he proclaimed our independence on June 12, 1898 in Kawit, Cavite. He made this occasion very special by asking a composer named Julian Felipe to compose a march for the independence ceremonies, and the result was a composition entitled Marcha Filipina Magdalo. This was later changed to Marcha Nacional Filipina. The Philippine national flag, which was made in Hong Kong by Mrs. Marcela Agoncillo, with the help of Lorenza Agoncillo and Delfina Herbosa, was also hoisted in public for the first time. The Americans. The country's independence was short-lived. On December 10, 1898, or almost 6 months after claiming our freedom, the Spanish government under the Treaty of Paris signed an agreement with the United States to turn over the Philippines to American control. Spain received $200 million for improvements they made in the country. Hostilities broke out between the Americans and Filipinos, but the superior strength of the new colonizer easily stopped the resistance. The United States of America had and continues to have a big influence on our culture and way of life. Some of these influences are good, some are bad. The Americans brought with them their form of government, democracy. This system has stayed with us to the present. The Americans describe this form of government as being of the people, by the people, and for the people. The Americans also introduced the public education system. They also brought with them Protestant missionaries who tried to convert the Roman Catholic and non-Roman Catholic Filipinos to this new religion. They built 2 big military bases, Clark Air Base and Subic Naval Base, for their military operations in this part of the world. The Philippines and the United States signed many economic agreements. Most of these agreements benefited the Americans much more than they did the Filipino people. The Americans also introduced the concept of Torrens title. As a result of Americanization of the Filipinos, English has become a second language in the Philippines. This is considered to be an advantage for Filipinos, especially in business. However, the use of English as a medium of instruction in schools is believed to disadvantage the poorer sector of Filipinos. Mass media, which includes newspaper, radio, and television, is an American influence. Many American television programs and movies are shown on our television sets and in movie houses. Some Filipino television programs and films try to copy American shows. The Americans ruled the Philippines for almost 50 years until World War II. Lastly, the Japanese. In 1941, the Japanese military forces occupied the Philippines during World War II. The Philippines was then a colony of the United States. The American officials and armed forces were forced to retreat. The Japanese stayed for almost 4 years. They ruled the country with a puppet government. This meant that Filipinos seemed to continue to enjoy their independence, but in truth, the government was controlled by the Japanese. During this period, many Filipinos and Americans were imprisoned in war camps. The prisoners suffered much pain. Many of them died from illness and the cruel treatment they received in the war prisons. When the Filipino and American soldiers surrendered to the Japanese on April 19, 1942, in Bataan, they were forced to march under the blazing heat of the sun from Bataan to San Fernando, Pampanga. This is known as the Bataan Death March. Thousands died along the way because of hunger, illness, and extreme tiredness. Many of them were shot to death by the Japanese. In 1945, the Americans, with the help of Filipino guerrilla forces, drove the Japanese out of the country and recaptured the Philippines. The Japanese occupation was short-lived. This period in our history taught the Filipinos how to survive in times of hardship and suffering.
So that's all for this week's lesson. Again, this is Teacher Je.